talk a little bit about some of the things that we did to leverage search and some of the things that I consider best practices around search. So we've been talking about search forever. Even as the technologies keep getting better and better and more advanced, we still have problems with search. So 62 of the respondents said that it's still taking too long to find content. And this was the response from participants in an AIM Information Management State of the Industry 2016 report. So why is it taking too long? And why is it so hard to find the right results when we are searching? I don't know about you, but I still had challenges. So another finding in that same report is that 52% said file shares were still one of their primary main content repositories. So how many people here have heard of ROT? Know what ROT stands for? Okay, a few hands didn't go up. Redundant, obsolete, and trivial content. So let me tell you that there is a lot of rotten content in those file shares, and it can be very risky. So earlier this year at another conference, an e-discovery director at a very large and very well-known company told me that getting control of the file shares and understanding what information was in there was her biggest priority and challenge, and kept her up at night constantly. So the expectation is that our customers, our friends, our users, to pick your description, just want to find the right information quickly and the information they want. And they're getting frustrated still. So too many results contribute to the too long to find information. And in some cases, there's been reports of knowledge workers giving up and then recreating a piece of content because they couldn't find it. Anybody heard of that before? I see nothing. So one of those factors is rot, right? So they can't find it because there's too much junk in the way. And all that extraneous content, this ROT, this rot, creates noise in the system. So if you think about it, if I'm looking for something, this noise creates this haze where I can't find what I'm looking for. Another factor that we see a lot of when you talk about search is the lack of metadata. So Google's approach with a Google appliance, some people still using them, is not the answer, where you're just trying to crawl the files without any kind of metadata. And isn't this what we want to see around the office when our friends and our customers are using search and saying, "Woo-hoo, I found what I was looking for"? So I'm going to share my three-part plan, which is based on my experience implementing and supporting search for the last 20 plus years. And a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is based on my search success managing the information and data from the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill for almost 6 years. So everything we build needs to be built on a sound foundation, so which better one to have than information governance? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is very, very important. I'm preaching to the choir here, everybody knows this. But I should say that effective policies, which are clear and concise, and they have to focus on the behaviors. Okay, it's one thing to have all this extraneous verbiage in there, but you've got to really describe the behaviors that you're looking for needed to support effective information governance. So clarity and simplicity are the key. This is my rule of twos. The policy should be no more than 2 pages. Now, I understand there's a lot of different audiences, but I'm talking about the general population, the staff that is going to be working day in and day out. 2 pages, nobody will read it. If you make it longer than that, they won't read it. If you make them go through a training class on that 20-page policy, they'll forget it as they walk out the door. Our policy was less than 2 pages. It was very, very directive about where information could and could not be stored. And it also clearly described the desired behaviors and the unacceptable behaviors. So an example of that is this you can barely see it, was not allowed. This is just a plain old thumb drive. So I couldn't just take that away from everybody because in some cases there might have been some people that needed to have one. So what we did is we provided a solution. So we provided them with an encrypted thumb drive. And we didn't give it to everybody. We only gave it to the people that really needed it. They had to fill out a request form and get it signed by the department head, not just their line manager, but the department head to be able to get one of those because it was needed for their business. But we did provide a solution. And that's FIPS 140-whatever. It's fully safe. You can leave it out in the hall and nobody will be able to crack it. So this to me is one of the critical procedures that you need to have in place. How information enters the organization needs to be defined and everybody needs to understand and be trained on it. This prevents the digital landfill effect. So if we just keep dumping information into the system, that's going to make search even more inefficient, more ineffective. It also instills rigor to make sure that the data quality remains high. So if we have high data quality of both structured and unstructured data, search will be better. So we had a set of processes and applications that we called the grid. And BP is fond of all kinds of acronyms. Anybody wants to know, you can come to the Q&A and I'll tell you what grid stood for. We came up with the acronym and then we had to back into it. So the answer is not to keep everything. And if we get it right on the front end as we're bringing information in, and we don't let those rotten files pile up, then we can make sure that this risk to value gap doesn't look like this over time. So while managing the data from the oil spill, we had such a diverse set of data and subject areas that we needed to be able to relate this data across so many subject domains. So master data management was foundational to what we did, and we leveraged that extensively for data analytics and search. So some examples include vessels, environmental sample chemistry, companies. So here's an example. We figured out later we had greater than 8,000 companies that worked on the response. We only had about 120 of those in the company's master data management system. So we had to have a way to be able to track and understand when we got back results how these related to all those companies. Once again, I'm preaching to the choir, but you need to have members of the business assigned participants. And so I had an information governance council where people were actively involved. And I maintain that if information is the new currency, then we should apply the same rigor to information that we do to money. And companies have audit committees, just saying. So this worked well for us because we had executive ownership of the information value to the organization. They understood it and they were actively involved in it. And also they cared and had a vested interest in the quality of the information because they knew if they didn't help with the quality of the information, then they wouldn't be able to find what they needed when they were working on different things. And right behind the need for this Information Governance Council is the need for business data owners. You've got to have people that really understand the information. And the only way that we're going to deliver on the value of the information is if they're actively involved in managing it. So we went to the leadership team and we said we need a primary and alternate data owner for these data domains. So for instance, the group that was all the scientists, I think we had 10 data domains, and they had, now some people were the same data owner for multiple domains, but they had somebody assigned so that if we had a question about water chemistry or chemistry results, then we had somebody to go to. Any changes to the taxonomy that we created that were needed? IT didn't approve it. We went to the business data owners and said, this is the change we're going to make. Are you guys okay with this? So they're the ones that really understand the information, and that's really going to drive the effectiveness of search. Well, let's assume that we've got that piece in place, a pretty sound information governance foundation. How can we use search to support information governance? So I appreciate Lynn kind of teeing this up for me this morning in her keynote. But one way is to proactively search for PII and other sensitive information that is lurking around in file shares, SharePoint sites, you name it, around the organization. And look for that inappropriately stored information, because I guarantee you all have some. And if you look at some of the data, it's pretty scary. From the 2015 cost of data breach Poneman study, right now, malicious and criminal breaches, it's up to $170 a record. So, okay, a spreadsheet with 1,000 employee names gets breached, could be an internal breach. Instantly, you've got roughly $170,000 in cost. So usually using search to identify these unknown risks can really pay off big. Also, you can use search effectively to start building out your data map and start understanding what you have. One of the technologies we used to do this very effectively was Elasticsearch. If you haven't looked at it, it's pretty interesting stuff. And some of the benefits of creating this data map include, profiling the data in your information estate to really understand it, so that you can make sure that you design or update and action your policies based on what you actually have. You may have antiquated policies based on information that you no longer have, or it may have a gap where you have data or information and it's not covered. You can locate and remediate some of those rot files that we talked about. Also locate and remediate any files that have sensitive information. One of the things that's really a huge lever for search and leveraging it for a data map is you can help the Chief Information Security Officer, or if you don't have one, a CIO or whoever, prioritize their investments they're using for cybersecurity and security spend. I think it's foolish to assume that we need to protect all the information in the organization the same way, the same level. So I maintain that if you have a bunch of PII and customer data, you probably ought to encrypt that data. You may not need to encrypt all the day-to-day information, but you can actually understand what you have and prioritize those investments. Another way you can use search is helping with e-discovery collection. One of the big costs is collections. Depends. For us, we had large volumes, so that was a big expense and that was a big challenge. And so when you have large volumes of information, you can use a very precise and accurate search to accurately collect effectively and efficiently what you actually need to produce and ensure that you've collected everything that is responsive. And that's where we leverage search quite a bit. We did some things. The DOJ had never received more than 1 terabyte of information, maybe 2 terabytes, and we delivered something like 20 terabytes once for one of the deliveries. And having them deal with that was kind of interesting. So often after search solutions are put in place and implemented, typically you don't hear much about it. It might be a rollout with some training, but really is proactive tuning and adjustments based on underlying changes supported or really looked at. And so as the information estate changes or changes in the information governance model, you really need to make sure that you have an operational model to support that. So at BP, we created an information and data management operations team. So another acronym, IDMO, but our IDMO team provided ongoing service support and training, and I can't stress the value of this investment. This is very, very different than application infrastructure support or help desk. Those guys and gals are looking through a totally different lens. My data management operations team were information data stewards, information governance geeks, and they were looking at this through that lens. And they actively were supporting the information governance functions, as well as making sure that search could accommodate any changes that were going on, because we were receiving new types of data all the time. And they would feed those back to the support team, the infrastructure support team, to tune search. Part of that support system, and this is very low cost, but very high leverage, was information governance champions. We had champions in each department. They became super users. We gave them some extra training, and they had direct access to my team members. And they would go out and help people. They would provide on-the-spot training, so they supported their colleagues. And so what did they get for it? Well, they got a lot of recognition from the department heads and also the leaders of the organization, and that was really beneficial to them. They really liked that kind of peer recognition. And this really can help this concept of a data management operations team happen even as a smaller organization. You could have a data management operations team of one with a virtual team of another half dozen or a dozen people around the organization. It was very effective. One of the other things that we did to make sure that search stayed on the right track is educate our stakeholders. So we had quarterly stakeholder briefings to make sure that we could enlist their help. What's working, what's not working. So it's one thing to have a bunch of people in the organization saying, hey, this search stuff, it's crap, it doesn't work. Well, okay, let's go a little bit deeper and let's figure it out together and have them enlist in helping solve the process. So we did this, and this way we would also surface upcoming and emerging requirements. And we made, one of the things here is you got to make sure that the attendees are senior enough to actually take action or go back and take action inside of their organization. And once again, like I said, they really have to take some ownership of search success. It's not just IT doing it. It's got to be everybody making sure that it's working. One of the things that we did, I highly recommend, is one size fits all doesn't work so well. And so what we did is we made sure we had IM procedures for each department. Obviously, we had a template and we had training wheels on this, but this way they owned it. And they also adjusted their procedures based on their use cases, on their business processes. And this really goes a long way to helping them feel like they're helping create their own solution for managing information as opposed to IM or information governance being done to them. And the output of this work really fed back into our search work and our search solution and helped them design their search use cases so that we could make sure that we were tuning search so that it would address their use cases, which might be, for instance, finance, or the claims people had very different search scenarios than the people in the research team or the scientific team. So finally, if you're going to do all this, you got to make it fun. So one of the things that you can do, let's assume that the technology is there, you've got a sound information governance. How do you get people to use it, and how do you get people comfortable with it? Half the time when we had people complain about search, it was because they were ignorant. They didn't know how to use it. And we would send them back to the information governance champions. But one of the ways you can do it is to really make it fun. So have search games. Put some content out there and put out a challenge. Go find this content. Make it hard to find. And encourages engagement, and you can reward that with little prizes and things like that. I have a whole nother talk that I could talk about driving change within an organization, a completely separate talk I did on how we did that. We also had our executive sponsors visibly recognize those who were modeling the right behaviors and also were contributing to the solution and helping. And they did this in a very visible way. We had all hands meetings and stand-ups, and they would call people out. They would also reinforce a lot of the information governance policies and procedures. And so they also answered questions from folks, and so that became an effective way to reinforce how we were going to use search effectively, and what each person in the organization, what their responsibility was to contribute to the solution. So you'll remember when we started out talking about too many results, contributing to the too long problem. And in some cases that those knowledge workers recreate their documents. And the other factor that we have to address, and I think this goes to Lynn's comments this morning, is go out and start looking at, how can I clean house and get rid of the rot? And that's really going to improve your search results. And agreeing that this is what we want to see around the office when people are using our search solution. So I want to reiterate, make sure that there's a sound information governance that's really going to influence how search performs. Second, use search to support information governance, and then it becomes a symbiotic relationship going back and forth and using search to get better about how we're managing information that's feeding back into how we improve search. And finally, make sure you implement an operational model to keep that search effective. So finally, thank you. And if you text infogov16 to this number, I will email you my latest white paper. It's called Not If, But When You Get Hacked, Measuring and Proactively Monitoring Information Risk. And so a lot of the things that Lynn talked about, that paper is almost like a business case, because I've quantified what is the impact of a breach, what is the impact of e-discovery costs, and things like that. So with that, I think I'm just about on time. Thank you.